What's up folks, Crush SG here with part 4 of my Noelle DPS series. Today we're going to take an in-depth look into artifacts. Now since I posted the first part of my guide series, I've now hit rank 45 and can finally target farm specific 5-star artifacts somewhat reliably. And I've spent the last few days working through all my spare fragile resins, doing an ungodly amount of testing, and I'm sure those of you with keen eyes have noticed that my Noelle stats are jumping all over the place in practically every video. Now that's cause I've had different gear equipped at various points of testing. Not necessarily to see which set is best, but more to understand how each set and stat balance works and how it fits into my playstyle. You know, to lessen the speculation and to up the facts, somewhat. Anyway, I think I'm finally at the point where I'm comfortable drawing some conclusions. That and I'm completely out of Mora and fragile resin. And I also really want to get back to clearing 12-3. You know, this series has been an unexpectedly interesting and long journey. Alright, so artifacts. I already talked a little about them in part 1, and what I'm going to do today is talk about all the DPS focused artifact sets or combinations that I've used and discuss their pros and cons. As always, a quick disclaimer, this is just my personal opinion on artifacts as it applies to my Noelle with my playstyle and preferences in mind. This is also by no means an exhaustive list. I don't have the time, the resources, or the RNG to be able to test every single thing out there, unfortunately. So take it all with a grain of salt. Okay, let's start with the combination sets first, i.e. combining 2-piece bonuses from 2 different sets, followed by the full 4-piece sets, and finally ending with a discussion on stat choices. I will not be including the early game sets such as Adventurers or even Berserkers because everyone only has access to a couple of sets at the start, so choices are pretty much obvious there. You just use whatever set you have at that point. Okay, so the combination sets we'll be looking at are the Archaic Petra, Gladiators, Defender's Will, and Martial Artists. Petra gives 15% geo damage, Gladiator gives 18% attack, Defender's Will gives plus 30% base defense, and Martial Artist gives 15% to normal and charge attack damage. This is also, in my opinion, the strongest bonus amongst all of them. An unconditional 15% increase to your normal and charge attack is huge for a 2-piece bonus. Conversely, the weakest bonus of the bunch would probably be the Gladiator's bonus. Percent attack is an additive stat, whereas the rest are multiplicative for the most part. The reason why Gladiator makes it on this list is because A, it can come as a 5-star artifact, i.e. more base stats in general, and B, it sets you up to eventually build into the 4-piece bonus, which in my opinion is really good. And of these sets, only Petra and Gladiators can roll 5-star versions, the other 2 max out at 4 stars. Now, while practically any combination of these sets would work decently well, and a lot depends on how the substats roll, here are the specific combinations that I would generally recommend. The first would be Martial Artist plus Gladiator. This is your full-on main DPS combo. It brings the unconditional 15% from Martial Artist and the 18% attack bonus from Gladiator. Of course, if you don't have Gladiators, you could substitute it with the Sojourner set or the Braveheart set. Both these sets give the same 18% attack bonus, but of course they only cap out at 4 stars, so I suppose you could use them for early to mid game, even mid to kind of late game, if you don't have access to good Gladiator pieces yet. Now I recommend this combo if you want to main Noelle as a DPS and don't have her as a C6. Now the next combo is the Martial Artist plus Defender's Will. Now this is your all-rounded set because it capitalizes on the huge base defense increase from Defender's Will. Having a 30% increase to base defense basically adds a flat 30% value to all your percent defense stats. And this works very well with the very popular White Blind Claymore, because percent defense is its secondary stat, and its special bonus gives a stacking attack and defense buff. Now I recommend this combo if you're running Noelle in any other position that is not a primary DPS, unless you have a C6 Noelle, or are extremely confident that you can have her burst up often enough to gain full value from stacking only defense. Now if you want to go even harder into the support direction, you can eventually replace the martial artist with a 2-piece Bolide for bigger shields, and it'll eventually set you up to go for a 4-piece Bolide down the road, which works both for support and for DPS. Okay, moving into the 4-piece sets, we have 3 contenders here, which really in my opinion should only be 2, but I've seen enough comments in the earlier parts of the series listing the 3rd set, so I figured I'd include it as the People's Choice set and give you my thoughts. The 3 sets are Retracing Bolide, Gladiators, and Petras. Yes, Petras would be the People's Choice set, though Bolide is also a heavy crowd favorite. And I'll talk about that one first, since that's what I have equipped at the moment. So the Bolide set, its 2-piece bonus increases your shield strength by 35%, and its 4-piece bonus increases normal and charge attack damage by 40% as long as you have a shield up. Now it's easy to see why this is a very well received set. It is quite literally built for Geo characters. Noelle pops a shield with her E, 35% increase to that, check. She deals geo damage during her burst, so she pops shields from Crystallize as well. 35% increase to that. Check. 40% increase to normal and charge attacks as long as you have a shield up, which you do most of the time. Check. Couple this with the very decent stats that I rolled on my Bolide pieces, and you have a set that has really big shields and does equally big damage. Almost all the time. And now we come to the reason why I personally rank the Bolide set just a tiny bit lower than the Gladiator set. And that is conditional bonuses. I just generally dislike conditional mechanics. Can I maintain 100% shield uptime with Bolide running double Geo characters? Sure, of course I can. But I find having to specifically seek out crystals from time to time, ensuring that there's a certain element debuff on the target just so that I can crystallize it and pick up crystals when my E skill is off cooldown, I just find this whole process a little bit distracting, and I would much rather just concentrate on killing stuff. That's really all there is to it. It's a 100% personal preference thing, and if you remove my personal bias from this equation, the 2 sets are really a toss-up. And of course, this segues nicely into my personal favorite set, Gladiators. Its 2-piece gives plus 18% attack, and its 4-piece increases normal attack damage by 35% as long as you use one of the listed weapons, which Noelle does, making it 100% unconditional. And that's pretty much it for the Gladiator set, folks. It's a straight up DPS set. Unconditional damage is the only thing the Gladiator set brings to the table, and of course I like my unconditional damage. Now the final set on the list pops up very often in the comments of my videos, and that would be Petras. Now Petras gives 15% geo damage for its 2-piece bonus, and its 4-piece is currently mistranslated. MiHoYo has officially confirmed that you don't gain 35% resist from picking up elemental crystals, but instead you provide a 35% elemental damage boost to your party whenever you pick up an elemental crystal. The elemental buff that you give, of course, is related to whatever crystal it is you pick up. It's not a universal elemental damage boost. It's a really good set, but here's my problem with it. First, the 2-piece geo damage bonus is a conditional bonus on its own, and I've explained that a number of times throughout this whole series. And its 4-piece bonus buffs your party with the element that you pick up, which will almost never be geo, making this 100% a support set. It's practically written all over the description, folks. Pick up crystals, buff team's elemental damage. I would not use or recommend this set for a primary DPS Noelle. which is the basis of this entire series for those new to my channel. If you don't already know, a primary DPS, aka main DPS, aka DPS carry, refers to a character that A, spends the most time on the field out of all your 4 characters, and B, deals majority of the damage. It is a pretty simple concept. If you are running a DPS Noelle, but majority of your damage is coming from someone else, you aren't running a primary DPS Noelle. You're running her either as a support DPS or a co-DPS. Okay, back to the discussion. There are a couple of scenarios where the Petra set could possibly shine, such as running Noelle as a support or a healer, in which case your main DPS character would be one that deals mostly non-geo elemental damage. Examples would be maybe Diluc, Zhongyun, Beidou, and Electro Kerting, and any of the mage characters for that matter, because mages only deal elemental damage. So that's where Petras would shine. Alright, so that's pretty much it for artifacts, folks. Let's quickly go over some basic stat choices. We have percent attack, percent defense, crit rate, crit damage. These are the typical ones in question when talking about DPS, but I'll add energy recharge to the list as well, because energy recharge helps. I'll leave Geo damage for its own section later on. Now, defense gives you more damage during your burst, it gives you bigger heals, it gives you a bigger shield, it reduces the physical damage you take. It basically scales with virtually every aspect of Noelle's kit, except for raw attack, of course. It only gets converted into attack when your burst is up. Now, percent attack, crit rate, and crit damage, they give you a damage boost both in and out of burst, to varying degrees. And of course, energy recharge helps you keep your burst up more often. Now, there are many arguments that can be made for going heavily into one stat or another. And honestly, folks, at the end of the day, it comes down to personal preference and playstyle. I just personally prefer a balance of stats across the board, rather than putting, say, all my eggs into one basket like defense. But of course, your mileage may differ. It really depends on the substats that you have and what artifacts you get and stuff like that. Okay, so what's the deal with Geo damage and why does it get its own section? Well, that's cause LE damage on a goblet is one of the most common recommendations given by practically anyone playing the game. And while it is certainly true that Geo damage will probably give you more damage, there are a few considerations here, a couple of which are unique to Noelle. First, and this generally applies across the board, LE damage might be a multiplicative stat, but because of how bonus damage is calculated, depending on how much bonus damage you already have, going for LE damage on your goblet might not net you as much damage as you think it will, and in some cases could cause you to pick a goblet just cause it has LE on it and end up losing overall damage. For more on this, check out my damage calculation video. The card is in the top right corner and the link is in the description. Next, unlike the typical mage class hero that deals LE damage 100% of the time, Noelle only deals Geo damage during her burst, which may or may not be up all the time depending on your gear, your team, and how you build her, which essentially makes Geo damage conditional to an extent. Lastly, unlike most other classes where LE versus percent attack is a simple which gives more damage comparison, things are a little more complicated for Noelle because we have another stat to consider that brings more than just DPS to the table, and that is defense. As everyone knows by now, defense increases your damage during your burst, scales your heals, scales your shield strength, and reduces physical damage taken. On top of that, defense also scales into attack when your burst is up. At up to an 86% efficiency sub C5, 104% efficiency with C5, and up to 154% efficiency with C6. Now, of course, this depends on your talent level. It is currently 118% for me at level 9, and that is 9 out of 15 possible levels. And yes, I've read your comments. There are a few of you who claim to be able to easily maintain a 100% burst uptime, most using the Favonius Greatsword. So let's go with that and assume that we have a 100% burst uptime. This takes percent attack completely out of the equation, of course, since it makes both defense and geo damage completely unconditional damage boosts. You can get up to 46.6% geo damage on a 5-star goblet. That number is 58.3% if you went for defense instead. Yes, one is multiplicative, the other one isn't. But remember, we could gain well over 100% scaling for defense depending on talent and constellation level. If you've watched my video on damage calculation, you'll know exactly where I'm going with this. Let's head over to my spreadsheet. Now what I have here is a DPS table with my Noelle's Bolide stats plugged in. I have included everything except the goblets for obvious reasons. Now as you can see, I typed the numbers in and it reflects the average raw damage expected from her normal attack during her burst. Once again, we are assuming a 100% burst uptime. And as you can see, I gain 7.7% DPS choosing a Geo Goblet over a defense one. Additionally, I also lose almost 19% heal and shield strength not going for percent defense. And of course, less defense also means we take more damage. 7% more damage is not great value for what you are losing here. But let's take a look at another DPS stat while we're at it. Crit damage. We'll do some lightning fast calculations, and there we have it. I gain 18.2% DPS going from defense or percent defense to crit damage on the headpiece. And I lose basically the same amount of heals and shield strength because it's still 58.3%. But now this is a much better value proposition. Yes, you could always choose to go for both crit damage and geo damage on the goblet. Gaining some, 27-28% more damage in total? Sure, but you lose almost 40% heals and shields. And a whole lot of physical damage reduction. But you know what? If a glass cannon build works for you, why not? Go for it. It'll make for some pretty exciting damage numbers. My point is, guys, when looking for potential artifact upgrades, always take a step back and look at the bigger picture. In this situation, we are not weighing the potential gains of geo damage versus percent defense on only the goblet artifact. We are actually weighing the potential gains of one DPS only primary stat versus percent defense on any one artifact slot. If you approach it this way, you'll see why geo damage on the goblet could very easily become the suboptimal choice. Now before we close, I'll preemptively answer a couple of questions that I know some of you may have. But Crush, defense only scales up to 86% sub C5. Doesn't this mean going geo damage on the goblet is better than percent defense as long as you don't have C5 or C6? Yes, it does. But the value of crit and crit damage would also scale up proportionally as well. So the net difference would be exactly the same. You might gain some damage going for geo on the goblet, or you could gain a whole lot more going for crit damage on the headpiece. But Crush, crit damage is only worth it for you because you have 60% crit rate. I use the white blind and I have less than 20% crit rate. Wouldn't geo damage be better for me then? Yes, it would. Look, I'm not saying that geo damage is straight up a bad choice. I'm just saying that there are very real situations and scenarios where geo damage could be a suboptimal choice. And it's important to be aware of that when looking for upgrades. This is also why I place value in weapons like the Royal Greatsword and the Battle Pass Serpent Spine, despite really disliking the way the bonus mechanic works on the Serpent Spine. And conversely, this is also why I place somewhat less value in something like the White Blind, strictly in terms of a primary DPS, of course. Alright folks, that brings us to the end of the artifact deep dive. Once again, if you want to know how damage is calculated, check out my video on damage calculation. I hope you guys found this video helpful, and as always, thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't, share my videos with your friends if you learned something, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care, guys.